Hello, DrupalCon. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Audra Martin Merrick. I'm the secretary on the Drupal Association Board of Directors, and I'm super excited to be here. I believe that open source belongs in schools, so I am really pleased to introduce Stu Keroff, founder, Community School of Excellence, Asian Penguins, and Aspen Academy Penguin Corps, along with a group of stellar students to talk more about this. So I'm going to welcome first our Master of Ceremonies, Joel Morris. Welcome to the stage. Over to you, Joel.
Good morning and welcome to Open Source Belongs in School. Let's put it there. In the next 45 minutes, you will hear our ideas of how we made our school better with open source software, and how you can too. Please join us in the Penguin Corps Pledge. What are we trying to do?
Change the world.
How do you change the world?
Be crazy enough to think you can.
Penguin Corps Agenda. Number 1, leader, me, calls meeting to order. Number 2, Stu Keroff, introduction and history. Number 3, Michael, activities and impact. Number 4, Sophie, diversity and inclusion. Number 5, Cam, our response to COVID-19. Number 6, Chase, why have an open source club? Number 7, Mohammed, how to do this. 8, Q&A. Please save questions for the end. Use the chat box and put a Q in front of your question. Now please welcome Mr. Stu Keroff.
Good morning. Hello, I'm Stu Keroff. Thank you for coming this morning. Sometimes people find it strange to find out that I'm not a coder or a sysadmin by trade. I'm a social studies teacher, and it's time for a history lesson. Last September, I got a new-to-country student in my class. This girl was working on learning a new culture, including learning English. I used Google Translate to convert some materials to Russian for her, and while that was great at school, it didn't really help her at home because her family didn't have a computer. Luckily, one of the first things I did when I started working at Aspen Academy was to start a club that taught kids how to use open source software to refurbish old computers. Those kids got to work on a machine for my young Russian friend, and we invited her mother to school to pick it up. Both mom and daughter had tears in their eyes when they found out the computer was theirs to keep, free of charge. We didn't know it at the time, but it was a process we would end up repeating dozens of times before the school year is over. Without open source, it would not have been possible. I'm a believer in the power of open source software to transform a school because I'm a witness to it each time I go to work. As you well know, most jobs today require some tech skills, so kids need to use tech at school to get them ready for their futures. Kids also need to have tech at home where it can help them and their families. But many families lack the means to get computers for their kids, and no school anywhere has unlimited money to meet these needs. These are pretty daunting problems. But what if I told you that there is a solution that is doable, scalable, and affordable? What if I told you the digital divide can be closed? What if I told you that students, instead of being recipients of the problem, can help drive the solution? And what if I told you that the answer can fit in the palm of your hand? This is a flash drive. It holds Linux, the operating system that fuels what we do. And as for those questions I just asked, all of those things are true, as some great students and I have been innovating with open source for 9 years here in Minnesota. It started at Community School of Excellence in St. Paul. It's also now taking place at Aspen Academy in Savage. Both of these schools have a Linux club. First, Community School of Excellence. It's a Hmong charter school, and its students are mostly Hmong and Karenni, with a high refugee population, high language needs, and high poverty. On the surface, that school is a lot like schools in many communities. You might not think it's a likely place for a technology revolution to happen, but a revolution is what we got. You see, CSE is home of the Asian Penguins, the school's computer club. The Asian Penguins were the first Linux club at a Minnesota school and the only one at a Hmong school anywhere in the world. And they were the start of a unique experiment. The ingredients of the experiment are pretty simple. Get open source software, get used computers, have kids do the work, and see what happens. The results of the experiment are in. This works. Having kids using open source software in school helps the kids, helps the school, and helps the community. How did it start? In 2011, Community School of Excellence launched a one-to-one laptop program, and we ran into a lot of programs that any school with a one-to-one program might have. Students breaking laptops, losing them, etc. To overcome the shortage in my classroom, I reached out to a great nonprofit called Free Geek Twin Cities, who gave me free desktop computers that ran Linux rather than Windows. They use Linux for their work because Linux is open source, free to get, free to use for any purpose, free to change, and free to give away. I was already a Linux user, so I thought that was pretty cool. Well, my students loved the computers, and a few kids started to come to my room after school to use them. From that, we started a club to learn about using Linux. The kids were all Asian. The mascot of Linux was a penguin, so we called it the Asian Penguins. But why should a school use Linux at all? Well, there are a few reasons other than the obvious one, that it's free. First, very few schools in the United States are using Linux. And I could follow that up and say elsewhere too. If you want to stand out, don't do what everyone else is doing. Now, schools are usually more comfortable in following rather than leading. But having an open source at our school gave our students a unique experience they wouldn't get anywhere else. Another reason for using open source at school is that it's used elsewhere. Set-top boxes, cell phones, self-driving cars, internet-connected crock-pots, the list goes on. If our kids are going into tech for a career, they will need to know something about open source. But the biggest reason is that using open source in school gave us an affordable way to have our students become technology leaders. Our kids became what I call partners in the process. The kids were learning how to install the OS, configure the apps, run software updates, and change computer parts. And the computers they were working on would be used by other kids. The kids who took part in the program could say, "This is something I did." In 2013, we began our biggest project, our school's digital divide. A lot of students didn't have computers in their homes. We took old computers, we made them run like new, and we gave them to families who needed them, free of charge. 2 years later, we needed to replace the laptops for our middle school. The school didn't have any money for it. The solution? Crowdfunding. The Asian Penguins started a campaign we called Operation Upgrade. We raised enough money and got enough donated computers to fill 2 laptop carts. And yes, the kids did all the software work. In 8 years, the Asian Penguins had over 250 kids come through the program, and we introduced hundreds more to Linux and open source software. In 2019, I changed schools and started working at Aspen Academy. Now, I had been telling people that any school could do this. So this was my opportunity to test that theory. When I started the Asian Penguins, we made things up as we went along because there was no template for us to follow. But at Aspen Academy, we did have a template. Mine. I knew what a Linux club could be because I'd done it. Aspen's leadership had never heard of Linux. But when I described what a Linux club could do for the kids and for the school, they couldn't say yes fast enough. The big question was, will the kids be interested? I started doing the things I had done at my last school. I invited kids, I showed my enthusiasm, and I let the kids try the software. When we started on that first Wednesday afternoon in September, we had 14 students who wanted to learn Linux. A club needs a name, right? We chose the Penguin Corps. I think the name communicates a sense of mission, and the kids picked up on that right away. The Aspen kids started doing many of the things that I taught kids at my last school. What are the different hardware components, and what do they do? How to install the OS, how to configure the apps, and so on. And just like the kids at Community School of Excellence, the Aspen kids loved it. They learned, they grew, they discovered, and they started making a difference. The way that both schools' clubs made a difference is by following a simple formula. Get computers, have kids recycle computers, and give computers away. And it all started from a pretty simple idea. Get kids using open source software and see what happens. Now it's time to let the kids tell the story. Thank you very much. Up first from the students is Michael Martin.